Welcome to the Value Agenda. I'm Oliver Colling, Managing Director of Kingsgate, and in every episode of the Value Agenda I sit down with someone who knows what it's like to work with a business facing challenges. Today my guest is David Paton, Founder and Chief Executive of Kinross Sports, and a trusted Kingsgate associate. David has spent over 2 decades working inside sports organisations facing challenges, including financial difficulties. Blackpool FC under court receivership, Peterborough United in a relegation fight, Spartan Race losing £750,000 a year. He knows what it's like to walk into a broken organisation, to earn the trust of the people inside it, and to actually turn it around. Sport by its nature is emotional. The fans, the owners, the staff, everybody feels they have a stake and everybody has a view. This is a conversation about sport turnarounds, but I promise the lessons travel well beyond it. This is the Value Agenda. Let's get into it. Firstly, it's really interesting because sport is something that grips everyone's attention, whether it's the watching the rugby on the TV, going along to football to your local club. But why do you think it is so many sports organisations find themselves in financial difficulties?
I think you've got a unique stakeholder set. I think that's probably the first point I'd make. So when you've got supporters or fans demanding X, Y, and Z and expecting money spent even when it's not available to spend, I think that's where the fundamental point of issue comes from. You've got to be pretty strong not to cave into the supporters' demands and requirements. No different to, you may have the greatest football manager the club's ever seen, but they go on a run of defeats and the fans say, sack the manager. And the owner will almost always acquiesce to the fans on that one. So I think that's one of the most fundamental points there. You've just got a unique stakeholder set compared to whether it's a retail business or manufacturing business. They're all very different. I think there's a huge human element to sport and sports clubs. So I think that's probably the unique point that just puts an extra layer of pressure on any business.
You mentioned that the fans' feeling, the fans' involvement. How much does emotion play a part?
A huge amount. If you'd seen me on Saturday watching Scotland-Wales rugby, my emotions went from the depths of despair that we might lose to the last 6 minutes where it was never in doubt. Highly confident at that point. Yeah, everything's emotional. It's very difficult as well if you look at sports clubs and football clubs in particular, and to a certain extent rugby clubs. You look at Bruce Craig at Bath Rugby, for example. He's a Bath fan. Luckily, he's in a position where his wealth allows him to put that investment in without risking his own personal wealth to a material extent, and also supports Bath, given that they don't have a large stadium compared to Tigers or Saints, for instance. And the same in football. There's any number of football owners that have just basically ploughed their entire fortunes in with nothing to show at the end of it, potentially just a receivership or an administration. And that's purely driven by emotion, but also that absolute desire to win. And that desire to win tends to cost money.
So given that desire to win, given that there's long history, particularly in football, of clubs spending a lot of money, ending up with formerly very rich owners who become much less rich by the end of it, and then it all ends in failure. Why do you think the ownership model continues as it is?
That's a good question. Because I think it's a rich man's fantasy to a certain extent, a rich person's fantasy. Especially you look at a number of the clubs who have owners who were fans, boyhood fans of a club. And the thing is, you can spend money on the best players, but if you don't have the synergy on the pitch, it's useless. And I think a lot of the time people don't look at process and procedure, but even on the football side and the rugby side. So you go and buy a £2 million striker for the championships, for argument's sake, but if you don't have the players to supply the ball to that striker, it's a waste of money. But sometimes if you get the right link and the right chemistry between players, you don't have to necessarily spend a lot of money. But I just don't think there's enough outside of the Premier League where you can make returns. I don't think you're going to get big corporates or consortiums coming in looking at it as a return on investment, shall we say, unless you get to the Premier League. So you're coming in at League 2, League 1 to a certain extent, certainly National League. It's really a passion play. And that's why it's still got the ownership model we've got.
No, that's really interesting because there's been more and more investment, particularly from sort of private equity type investment in lower league football, all with that promise of getting to the Premiership. Now, presumably, there will come a point where not everybody can get to the Premier League.
That's exactly right.
And then what happens?
Yeah, you look at Birmingham City, And I read a really interesting article before the start of this season, because they came into the Championship at the same time as Wrexham at the end of last year from League One. And Tom Wagner, the chairman, said, I think it's something like 16% of the Championship have parachute payments at any one time. And Birmingham City came into the Championship without that. Their income, because they've got the likes of Tom Brady as a minority investor, and therefore they attract the brands that would never ordinarily look at Championship football or League One. But they're saying their revenue this year in the Championship will be on a par with those at parachute payments. And were they to be able to compete straight off the bat into the Premier League, their revenue in year one in the Premier League with all the sponsorship endorsements would put them about ninth, I think it was, in the Premier League revenue table. So there's a very different model. So you've got American private equity with Knighthead Capital having come in. That one makes sense because you've got the size of the club. It was what, I hate the term sleeping giant, but they really were. Wrexham's totally different. Still a much bigger club. They should never be in the National League or even League Two, League One probably. They probably are a Championship club if run properly without the Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhennys of this world. Then you look at, I take for example, Peterborough United when I was there playing in the Championship. I mean, by far the lowest squad budget in the league. It was a battle for that whole season in the Championship, but very lucky and went on a great run the year before to get promotion in the first place. And again, probably one of the smallest budgets in League One. But again, that's where if you have a certain number of players that gel together and they can go and get the momentum, you can get there. But yeah, unless you can find the next Birmingham City, who I think will probably end up in the Premier League. But then you can look at the Premier League and say West Bromwich Albion are quite a big club, but they yo-yo between the two. Southampton have yo-yo between the two. Leicester City, obviously, Leicester have now got enormous problems with points deductions and the like. But yeah, I think like Birmingham City, if you can get that sort of opportunity, then it makes sense. But would you go with the greatest respect to Mansfield Town? You're not going to take them to the Premier League unless you're just lobbing hundreds of millions in for fun.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you've got those, as you say, Birmingham City is a great example. There is a large history to the club. They get decent crowds even when they've been not performing well. And the other associated commercial revenues and so on still hold up because of who they are. And a similar thing happened when Leeds United were down in the third tier. They were still getting 25,000 a week, which was absolutely remarkable. So have clubs like, let's take Brentford as an example. They got to the Premier League. They appear to be reasonably secure, perfectly happy with, in effect, being mid-table, developing players, selling them on and spending the proceeds to keep at a certain level. Do you think that's sustainable?
I think so. And Matthew Benham, that's a really interesting model because obviously his background around sticks in particular and the gambling world, they've just created this model. Just something similar to Brighton and Hove Albion, to be honest. They built a stadium that was modest. I think it's late 20,000s. They've not gone for a 40,000 seater stadium because they may well not have filled that. They've gone for a stadium that is a modest size but containable. And had they not had the success they had, it wouldn't have been out of place in the Championship. They'd have still filled it in the Championship probably at that level. They know who they're going to get as their next manager, probably 3 managers down the line. They have this huge database and research function around players. And they're looking at everything. They're not just looking at the basic stats. They're looking at personalities and culture and will it fit with the culture. So for clubs like Brentford, culture is everything. And you have to fit into that culture. They're not going to change that for any given player coming in. They do their homework probably better than most clubs. So around the sort of player due diligence, and it's the intangible pieces as well. It's not just how many tackles, how fast they run, how far they can run, etc. It's will they fit into, let's call it, for lack of a better term, sort of the family feel of Brentford as a club. It's them and Brighton, for me, stand out as very much family-friendly clubs, good community clubs, and they're not going to push the button too far to try and chase European football. If they get it right, they've got a fighting chance of getting into Europa League, Europa Conference. But they're not going to bet the bank on getting there. As long as they are in the Premier League and they finish probably 14th and above, give or take, they're quite happy because then they can play on year on year.
And that sounds like a really sensible way of doing it, a prudent model that doesn't take into account success. Because from some of the discussions I've had, there are clubs who in effect try and fund themselves in advance of success. Yep. And if they're not successful, then things start to fall apart.
How many times have we seen, especially in football, the manager's sacked and the new manager comes in and changes 2/3 of the squad at the next transfer window because he wants his players in the team. Now, the expense of maybe take a loss on some of the players you sell The ones you bring in, there's signing on bonuses, there's transfer fees, etc., etc. Whereas if you look at Brentford and again Brighton, it's seamless when they change coach, and they don't tend to sack their coaches, go on to what's perceived to be the bigger club, the next step in their managerial career. They've already got a plan. Nobody's seen Keith Andrews at Brentford becoming manager there, but look at the job he's done, because there's process, there's proper process. Everybody knows what they're doing. I think you'll hear this phrase from turnarounds: everybody stay in their lane. If everybody stays in their lane and does what they're meant to do, the end result tends to be pretty impressive and pretty positive. And that's what Brentford and Brighton do. Then you take Manchester United as an example, maybe Tottenham Hotspur as well. Change the manager, they change half the squad. If we don't have such a player that will suit that manager, so we have to go and do it. That's putting more financial pressure on the business.
I really recognise that as a Manchester United supporter. I've noticed that many times over the last few years. But I think in some ways that's a very hopeful thing, that we do have clubs like Brentford who perform successfully and still have that emotional attachment with the local community. I think if you look from the outside, the professional game in England certainly has far too many professional clubs. And I don't think anyone would argue with that. But I'm not sure if there's any answer looking in the future, because I read something the other day, wouldn't it be great if we had some kind of franchise model around football? Well, yes, it would. But can you imagine we're not going to have Liverpool and Everton. We're going to have Mersey Pirates or something as the Liverpool-based franchise. Is that going to work in England? No.
Chance.
So what's the answer, do you think?
I actually don't know. I wrote a white paper way back in, I think it was about 2009-10 maybe, because I was looking at Scottish football as well. And it was in the days when there was a lot of chat around Rangers and Celtic potentially joining the English Premier League. Is that we can't just join the English Premier League. You've got 24 clubs in the Championship who are going to be pretty put out by that idea. And I came up with the idea that if the Scottish Premier League would join it, the entire Scottish Premier League would join with League One. So you'd end up with League One North, League One South, League Two North, League Two South. And then basically the bottom two leagues in Scotland would really become regional leagues. And then the two winners, the winner of League One North and South, would automatically go into the Championship. And then it'd be a playoff for the last place between League One North and South. That way Celtic and Rangers would naturally gravitate into the Championship in a fair way by winning. And then if they get to the Championship, well, that's up to them, how they then proceed from there to the Premier League. And then that way, some of the clubs would have probably gone part-time at the lower end of League Two in England as well, because a lot of these clubs just aren't sustainable as they are now. And we've seen some pretty sad cases of Scunthorpe in the last few years, going down a pretty nasty path. There's any number of other clubs you could talk about in that way. Bury as another one, Macclesfield. Obviously, Macclesfield have risen from the ashes, but again, down to a benefactor. That's ultimately how it's happened. Although, again, you look at that as quite an interesting test case, because what they created in the main stand was a new bar and restaurant, a gym that has subscriptions for the community. They've done a 3G pitch rather than the grass, which is fine in non-league. Obviously, if you got to the Football League, you can't do that. But they're generating non-match day income. And they're creating something sustainable, but also right into the community. So that's quite an interesting model. But again, it's still coming off the back of a benefactor to get them up and running.
Yeah, it keeps coming back to the same thing, doesn't it? We have wealthy people with deep pockets who are willing to take a bet on investing in football. Just thinking more broadly. So, David, you've been working in sport a long time now. How did you become such a specialist in, effect, sports advisory?
Yeah, so it was a bit of luck, really. I was in the ops team, did pre and post merger work. The deal space dried up in 08-09. There were a number of redundancies made within the team. And I've been quite fortunate. I met a non-exec director of Colchester United in my local golf and country club and spoke to him pretty much daily about football. He was a football nut. And he managed to arrange for me to come and present to all the Football League clubs at one of their quarterly meetings in Walsall. And off the back of that, got a bit of traction. And from then on, at GT, I then focused entirely on sport. And it fitted for me because I'm a sport nut myself. So to get to talk about something that you absolutely love makes life quite easy from a job point of view. And then just use my ability to win work thereafter. Once I left Grant Thornton, I've just been in very interesting situations. I found myself in interesting roles, whether it's at Blackpool. Peterborough United was really interesting. Spartan Race was really interesting for many reasons. And yeah, just garnered knowledge. I've got a great contact base within sports, so tend to be able to find out what's happening at any given time in any sport and look for the opportunities as and when they come up.
So tell us a little bit about some of your experience. You mentioned Spartan, saying that was very interesting. Tell us a little bit about the situation there.
Yeah, so Spartan race, obstacle course racing, mass participation. So common sense dictates that if it's mass participation, and it's like any event, you sell the tickets first. Therefore, you know how much money you have in the kitty to spend on the event. And somehow Spartan race in the UK were losing about £750,000 per annum. And the US head office in Boston, they decided there wasn't a market in the UK for mass participation, which was interesting given that Tough Mudder were flying at the time. And so I took it over, became the UK MD of the franchise. And I just used common sense, to be honest. There was things like we had a marketing manager who was on, for argument's sake, I think it was about £5,000 a month for 2 days a week. And she then had 3 agencies all on around £10,000 a month to do all the work. So that's clearly not working because ticket sales aren't there. So I got rid of all the agencies. She left as well. I brought in a marketing manager from the human race business and who knew mass participation. And that was, I think he was paid something like $35,000 a year. But you got somebody that actually knew mass participation. And then I took a young lad, relatively recent graduate from Bill Kenwright's theatre group. And he'd created this piece. He was a rocket scientist. He was super intelligent. He created this piece of software that he called the Ether. And it's interesting because you think about Spartan Race, Tough Mudder, all these, you've got your different distances, no different to a triathlon these days that everyone likes to do. So you've got your 5K Spartan Race, and that's going to be groups of girls and guys, families, stag weekends, hen weekends, having weekends away. There's 5K, and it's a beginner. Over the course of the 12 months that the tickets are open, you know there's going to be fairly flat at first for the 5K, and then with little spikes in it towards the end as people think, actually, I'll do that. Then you go all the way through to the 50-kilometre, I think it was called Bear Race or whatever it was, overnight. There was a 24-hour thing through the night, and you know that it's only the hardcore that do that. Yeah. So they're waiting for the tickets to come on sale, and straight away, so you know that the marketing curve or the sales curve is going to peak really quickly in the 50-kilometre one, and then it plateaus. Whereas some of the other ones could be slow burn with a couple of spikes. So we started to look at, and he was able to do this as he had done with Bill Kenwright's business. The methodology, you put on the event, you sell tickets. It's that simple, and you control costs. So from having all the historical data we had from Spartan, we could see where to actually spend the marketing spend to maximize the sales. And so it was very successful. There's even little things, though. Everybody gets a beer at the end of the race. And when I first met with the team that was there, and they were saying they were buying in the beers at something, 60 pence a unit. I was like, why are you buying beer? I said, the easiest thing to do is product. So I got in touch with Brewdog. I knew one of the guys there. I said, if you want to sponsor us, we don't want any money. I just want product. And it saved something like £30,000. Just something as simple as that. So a lot of the Spartan was just common sense. And then the US got really interested again because it was making money. And they wanted it back. So that's what we did. And I chupied across the team that had been at Kinross into the Spartan-owned UK Spartan race. But it was really interesting. I enjoyed that because it was literally just common sense.
Yeah, it sounds fascinating, David. As you say, so often it's common sense.
Yeah.
Just looking at things, taking a fresh look, maybe taking that step backwards and be able to see what's happening. And so actually, why are we doing it this way?
You'll be the same. A fresh set of eyes is sometimes all that's actually required. Because when you're in the weeds, and you can't see the wheat from the chaff, it's difficult. Whereas you get coming with a fresh set of eyes and you're looking for stuff deliberately because that's your job. It's just that little bit easier.
Yeah. Although I suppose in some situations you don't always get that chance to take that step back and consider it. Think about your time at Blackpool, for example.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that, because that sounded like a fascinating assignment.
Yeah, we were appointed by the court receiver to go in and run the club. And that one, it was interesting. Myself, my former colleague Ben, we basically pitched the receiver the day before the court order was made and said, we'd like to go in and run the club. And we had a couple of meetings and it was decided we would go in and run the club. And yeah, that was an interesting one because there was the Not a Penny More campaign from the fans for about 5 years prior to that. So militant as well. So the Oyston family, they'd done a good job in terms of getting Blackpool to the Premier League back in 09-10, but they then got greedy with the money. And there was a minority shareholder. When they were taking out dividends, they forgot that they actually had to pay the minority shareholder as well. And in the end, he obviously wanted his money and went down the legal route. But the fans weren't putting any pennies in at all. So almost an entire boycott of the home games, to the extent the away fans wouldn't spend any money once they were inside the club. They joined and helped the Blackpool fans through that. We're seeing it with a couple of other clubs. We had it at Sheffield Wednesday not so long ago. But yes, they were getting crowds of 600, 700 in a stadium that holds 17 and a bit thousand. and it was all away fans. And then the Blackpool fans would go to all the away games because that money wasn't going to Blackpool and the owners. So we got there and the stadium was pretty dilapidated. The Irish sea air doesn't help metal particularly well. Seagulls and pigeons were having the time of their lives because there was never any fans in the ground. Then we found staff who were confused about what was going on. They worked under the Oyster family. They didn't necessarily want to work under the Oyster family, but they had. And there was an element of gaining their trust pretty quickly because these two random blokes turned up to say, actually, we're going to be helping to run this football club. So there was a huge piece around culture and getting people back in a positive mindset. And then 2-3 weeks after that, we had the first home game, homecoming Saturday. And we opened the stadium to maximum capacity against Southend United and scored a last-minute equaliser to make it 2-2, which just helped things. But everything was broken. I've got pictures on my phone of air conditioning units that I was terrified were going to fall on supporters' heads outside because all the supports were rusted. The man-safe cover on the stand was broken, so you couldn't get up there. But some of the stanchions were actually almost flimsily moving around because of corrosion and rust. And there was a huge community piece there. It wasn't just financials, but we had to demonstrate to the Football League that we had enough cash flow to get us to the end of the season to avoid a 12-point penalty, which would have been catastrophic. And we managed that, and that fundamentally changed the season, because had we gone down, that's a very different outlook into League Two. Whereas we consolidated in League One, new ownership came in. Simon Sadler bought the club in June of 19. So we started on the February of 19. And that obviously then gave them stability across the board. Things like sponsorship, we had betting across the entire shirt. So front of shirt, back of shorts. And because nobody wanted to sponsor Blackpool because of all bad publicity, I think the shirts were grossing around 35,000 a year on sponsorship. And it was a local betting company that were mates with the Oystons. And that was why we did it. And I'm pretty anti-gambling when it comes to football clubs and football shirts. I think that I would want, if my kids were buying a club shirt, I want them wearing the same one that their heroes, whether it's the ladies' team or the men's team, you want to be wearing the same shirt. I think it devalues the joy of it. But I had basically 6 weeks to turn that around, because if you've got to go to print on the shirts. We had Araya, the kit manufacturer at the time, they needed to go to manufacturing. And I went to the council, and luckily the chief exec of the council was also a Blackpool fan. So very much played that this is a community asset. Within Blackpool, there's so many other challenges going on that this needs to be a beacon of hope for the town as a whole. And we came up with a really interesting sponsorship deal. We used the tourism budget. So we had visitblackpool.com on the front of the shirt. And then on the away shirt, we used the opportunity to get a male mental health campaign of the council's called Get Vocal. We put that on the away shirt to start a conversation around male mental health and addiction and all the things that were happening in Blackpool. Because again, my view was that the football club had to be the starting point of all that. And we got Merlin Entertainment involved. They sponsored the family stand because they got the Madame Tussauds and the ballroom and the tower in Blackpool. And we came up with an idea for kids to get in the family stand. They got a free sandwich at every home game, courtesy of a supplier in Blackpool, because the kid poverty was a huge issue in Blackpool. So some of them weren't eating constantly at home. So we were providing them with some nutrition if they were there. So it wasn't just a financial turnaround. It was culture, it was community, and they're thriving now. We went back 2 Novembers ago and we were still greeted like heroes, which was really lovely. Weren't allowed to buy a drink all night, which was hilarious. But yeah, that was hard work, but it was fun. It was a lot of fun because you were bringing joy to a lot of people. You were turning around a civic asset, really. By the time we got the 3 sponsors on the shirt, we were grossing 200,000, which is higher than Sunderland, who were in League One at the time.
That's fantastic.
And it was all non-gambling. I almost got a deal away with Gamble Aware to sponsor a stand. I went the entire opposite way from gambling. I was keen to get that done, but just couldn't quite get that one over the line. But yeah, we did some really good work there, but we had no HR function. Basic things such as DBS checks. We've got children in the stadium every other weekend. We've got the academy. There were some challenges around that we had to address and deal with pretty quickly. But we basically made it a blanket that every full-time member of staff was DBS checked, and we kept records. And we didn't have an HR function when we walked through the door. We had to rebuild the financial statements from 2 years of cash books because there was nothing. It was a lot of great work, and then bit by bit we had a questionable four-star hotel within the stadium. The fire doors weren't compliant. The kitchen was. We'll even go into what the kitchen was like. So bit by bit, we had to just find pockets of cash where we could, or get the sponsorship money in to allow us just to make sure that the stadium was actually compliant. And then we did little things, just again, good news stories. A local company gave us value in kind for the change room to be fully refurbished and make it feel like a more professional home change room. So there was a lot of intangible pieces to that one as well. It wasn't just about the money. It was across the board. It was fun. It's probably the best project I've been involved with, I'd have to say.
Oh, it's
It
fascinating.
mattered so much. And then the next season, they got promoted to the Championship.
Oh, that's a brilliant story, David. And I've got just raised a couple of questions with me. The first one would be, you talked about the coming in and finding all the staff were very demotivated.
Yep.
Some probably didn't want to be there. How did you manage to turn that around?
To a certain extent, it was just being open and honest with them. And actually, a lot of the time using the hardest word, which is no, because they suddenly thought we'll be able to do this and this. But transparency and honesty. And also with Ben and I, we were very tight. So if they asked either of us a question, they would get the identical answer. And the staff knew that there was no gaps between the interim chief exec and the interim COO. I think that engendered trust. And also, you've known me for a long time. I'm fairly outgoing. I'll be a positive voice around the room. And my door was always open, so they could come in and talk at any time. But also meant that I could hear what was going on out on the floor. And if there were issues that hadn't been brought to my attention, I could just get involved with and deal with and nip them in the bud. But they were good staff. They hadn't had any direction. They would drift. So giving them structure and a common purpose of, we want to avoid the 12-point penalty. We want to just survive until we have an owner, because we don't know when it's like when you're selling a business in distress. There's no guaranteed timeline. You can think, hopefully 4 months from now we'll be in a position where we're done, but almost never runs to that timeline. So you've always got to have another couple of months of cash in the background just in case.
No, that's great, because I think so many, not just in sport, but in so many turnaround situations, that kind of involvement, openness and transparency with everybody involved is often missing.
Yeah.
Because what people want is certainty, whether the certainty is good or bad.
Yes.
Being open and keeping that communication going is so important, because you want to motivate people to do the best they can in the circumstances.
And that openness and transparency is also reflected upwards to the Football League, so that they were kept abreast of everything that was going on the whole time. Because you've got to make sure that they're comfortable with what's happening, so that they're able to then make a decision not to give us the penalty, and we didn't get the penalty in the end.
Well, which is a great achievement in itself, it sounds. And the other question I had was, you've got a big local fan base, they had their campaign, their boycott in effect. How did you persuade them to come back?
We didn't have to do any persuasion. As soon as the Oyston family left, it was done. Yeah, I mean, you have very different elements to the Blackpool support as well. So you had the Not a Penny More campaign, which was run by the Blackpool Supporters Trust. You had a supporters group called the Muckers, who were the hardcore, behind the goals, home and away every game. And then I think there might be Blackpool Supporters Association as well. So you had sort of conflicting groups, all wanting slightly different things. But ultimately, all they wanted was the football club back, all of them. And we had some fun and games with other things. Security company we had to change. And when they finally lost the contract, they started to try and cause issues by whispering in certain people's ears that myself and Ben, for instance, had said certain things about them behind their backs, which we hadn't done. And of course, it riled certain members up, and it was quite tense for a period of time, for a couple of weeks. And then they realised that these people had been played by security company just trying to cause trouble. All that is the sort of stuff you don't think about in these situations, but when it masses to so many people, you get these situations.
Yeah, it goes back to what we were saying earlier about the emotion. The emotions involved in sport are so powerful.
Yep.
That it's almost the work we did at Scottish Rugby. Yep. I was always conscious of the fact that there are so many people who feel they have an emotional attachment, whether they watch half an hour of the Six Nations once a year, or whether they're players, supporters, members of rugby clubs, whoever it is. They have this expectation that they need to know what's going on, and whatever they want is really important. So managing that against basically the basic things about turning a business around and getting back to a good financial position is always a huge challenge.
Yeah. No, it's the stakeholder pieces we said at the start of the podcast, it's just so unique in sport. And trying to keep everybody happy is almost impossible. It's just doing your best across the board wherever possible.
So tell us a bit about Peterborough. Different challenges, I suspect.
Different challenges, a number of challenges. But Peterborough, their former chief exec, had been there for 17 years. He was a reluctant chief exec. He basically just assumed the role 17 years ago. And Yeah, again, the staff hadn't had the direction possibly for a while. Unique challenge of having three owners with three very different personalities and three very different agendas, which always makes it quite interesting. We had Darren McAntony, who long-time owner of the club, and Darren's very much about player performance, the first team, cash flow, and by that, literally just seeing what cash is in the bank, and winning football matches. And that was his domain. Football was his domain. So Chief Executive Peterborough United does not get involved in football. You run the business and the football stays. But that comes really quite difficult because you don't know what the owner's going to do in terms of budgets and just spending against what you agreed the season before. And then with the two Canadian owners who are no longer part of the club, one of them was very much about the academy and the ladies team, and the other was about the new stadium and building our own members app, season fans app, where you could have posh TV, etc., etc. So you having to combine three very different opinions. Playing in the Championship, clearly the lowest budget in the Championship, so always flirting with relegation from the moment I got there in December. Went on an interesting run through March, April, and almost stayed up. They ended up going down by 4 points. And then Reading had a suspended 6-point penalty, which should have been applied that season. And as we now see with Reading, myself and the Barnsley chief exec at the time, because we were the two fighting not to go down to a certain extent. There was always a chance one of us wasn't going down. So we got in touch with each other. And I'm sure you found this with Scottish Rugby and the other unions. It's quite collegiate at a certain level within football clubs. All the chief execs actually just want to help each other out. We all want a successful football club. We can't control what happens on the pitch, but off the pitch, you can actually really be quite collegiate, joined up. So we wrote to the Football League saying we're aware of what's going on at Reading. We're basically saying this before we're relegated. We don't want it to look like sour grapes doing it retrospectively. We believe there's a case to answer that suspended 6-point penalty be handed down, be enforced this year, because actually it relates to this year's finances. So there's no point doing it next year. And they didn't go with that, and we got relegated. But that one high point at Peterborough was playing Manchester City in the 5th round of the FA Cup at Peterborough. Played Bristol Rovers in the 3rd round, then beat QPR in the 4th. And then I was planning to have a nice quiet Sunday after the QPR game. And I said, before we go out with the kids, let's just want to see the draw, just so I know we got the draw. I was like, I'm not coming out today. My phone was blowing up by that point. But you only had sort of 2 weeks to turn that around and make that. And again, for Peterborough United, with the level of finances there, that was a big money maker for us. That was worth £1 million of additional revenue in the end over the course of the FA Cup run and playing Manchester City. We found spaces in the stadium. We didn't even know we could put hospitality in. We sold everything. We had quite an interesting, not a debate. I was told off to a certain extent, but I set the ticket prices for the game. And I said, our match day, if you walk up on the match day, it's £30 to watch a Championship game. So season ticket holders, because it's not included in the season ticket package, I said season ticket holders are £32 for a ticket, and then obviously concessions for kids, etc. Those that buy after season ticket holders is £42, because there has to be a recognition that the season ticket holders that are there for, with the greatest respect, Cardiff City away on a Wednesday night in January, or 2 years ago Port Vale away type thing, it has to be recognised that they've been with the club all the way through. So they have to feel like they're getting something, that they're being acknowledged. And also, if you don't come all the time and you just come because it's Man City, there's a premium to pay. But there was a lot of pushback from the fan groups about that. And the owners went on social media and threw me under the bus because they were getting a lot of stick. But it's the job of the chief exec, I get that. But ultimately, they came to the conclusion that actually the pricing was right. And we probably could have sold it 2 times over. Such was the demand. Yeah. But again, within Peterborough, at that point, even the Championship, there was no HR function. And we had a couple of issues we had to deal with. There was no monthly management pack. The first thing I did when I got there was say, look, I need to see a management pack. I need to be able to see month on month where we are, even allowed from the football element. So just there's a lot of professionalising. There's a lot of realigning staff and getting them focused. And again, upbeat. There's a lot of cultural piece there to get everybody teed up and pointing in the same direction, especially when you're in a relegation fight. It can be quite demoralising. But it was certainly interesting. And it opened my eyes to a different type of scenario within a football club.
Yeah, that's great.
Stuff, the set up a new dome, training ground, a 3G pitch indoors. So there's lots of good stuff there as well.
No, thanks, David. That's fascinating. Just picking on one of the things you were saying, that point about professionalisation, about how sporting clubs operate and sports bodies operate. Why do you think it is that there are still plenty of organisations out there that haven't been through that professionalisation? They're quite happy to spend tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of pounds on players, but won't hire an extra person to actually make their support functions more efficient and actually give them better information to make decisions from.
I think in football, if you look at a lot of the chief execs in football, it's maybe slightly changing now, but a lot of them have come from being commercial director or chief commercial officer and then become chief executive. It's a very different skill set. And if in a sales function, the best salesman never makes the best sales manager, because the salesperson is hungry, is greedy, is selfish. Well, that's great if you're just doing sales, and that's what you have to worry about is sales. If you've then got to manage other functions, not sure that's going to work so well. So I think not having the right people in the right positions harms a lot of football clubs as well. But when I talk about professionalisation, day 2 in the club, the office that I inherited, I still had a lot of stuff. I had match day programs going back 17 years, and there were filing cabinets with board papers from 17 years ago, which clearly we didn't need to hold on to anymore. I sat there by the morning of the second day, and I like to be tidy. I like order in my office or my workspace or whatever else. And I can't work here. I can't do this. So I then went for a wander around the offices, and there was just stuff everywhere. So I basically said, right, next Monday we're getting skips in, and we're purging this office space. It's not conducive to our best work because there's too much stuff. We need to be clear of thought, clear of desk, clear of office, clear of building. And I think we filled 52 bags of confidential waste in the first 2 hours, and then God knows how much stuff after that. But then also I got all the offices painted, just so they had a lick of paint, and we got a local supplier to come and do it again as a value in kind deal. So they got some tickets for the staff to come to games. And as tickets are the one thing, if you're not selling out, tickets are the one thing you can absolutely provide in these situations. But then even in the entrance to the stadium, it didn't feel like you were walking into Peterborough United Stadium. So we changed all that. We put a couple of big crests up. We used the blue Pantone for posh. We put some colours up. So when you walked in, it's like, there's no mistaking, you've arrived at Peterborough United. And it's that sense of pride. And so when I talk about professionalisation, it's not just the actual nuts and bolts of the business. It's the look, the feel, the culture, giving people pride in where they work. It doesn't matter just true of football. It can be any business. If you're not proud of where you work and you're not motivated to work, you're not going to get the best out of people. There's little things like that, and they are intangibles, but they make a world of difference. When it comes to the ultimate end game, these are the bits that actually help get you in the right direction.
Absolutely. Now, that's fascinating, Dave. Just thinking more broadly, thinking ahead, what do you think are the biggest challenges in the next few years for professional sport?
Take professional football and Premier League football, obviously the removal of gambling from the front of shirts. That's leaving a number of clubs with a challenge. So you'll have clubs that are used to getting 20, 25 million a year for a betting company for front of shirt. That's no longer there. Betting companies always paid a premium. And it's a buyer's market right now. I think it was 11 of the 20 Premier League clubs had betting on the shirts this season. So if you're, for argument's sake, going back to an old Chelsea sponsor, for example, Samsung going to pay top dollar? No, they're not, because they know right now they've got 11 clubs to pick from, and they can probably get a phenomenal deal for the next 3 years, and then it will gradually, incrementally increase. And that's a challenge there. I think for rugby and certainly cricket and football at the lower level, a lot of aging stadiums and venues where there's a huge amount of capex required, and it's finding new innovative ways to make money. We talk about it a lot, and Murrayfield will be the same, trying to make it a 365-day operation where you're making money every day from the function rooms, from the extra pitches out the back, or whatever it might be. So I still think that you need better people in quite a few roles within professional sport, which is probably a bit widely said, but I do think that, you still don't have the right people in some of the right roles. And I've always maintained that the best commercial directors and best salespeople should actually work in League One and League Two, where it's really hard, because that's where they can make the biggest difference. In the Premier League, to a certain extent, deals will come to you because you're Premier League. So you don't have to necessarily hustle. Whereas if you've got the best people, they should absolutely be League One, League Two to make a difference. That's not going to happen, clearly.
No, I think that's right. And that whole sort of goes back to what we were saying about that professionalisation of how things work, because sport is big business.
Yes. Yeah.
However, so many sporting organisations almost don't treat it as if it's a business at all. And that's something that's always baffled me, because Yes, you can have the emotion, you have the passion. I can get pretty passionate myself sometimes when I'm watching sport. But even the organisations that I'm working with, I can have that emotion, but still be quite rational in the way that I approach it and look at decision making.
And that's why I like working in football, because I'm not a football guy. So I'm not going to worry about who's playing on the right wing or centre half. That's just not what whichever team I'm with at the time, whichever club I'm with, I want them to win. And I still, on every Saturday, I still look at the Blackpool results. I still look at the Peterborough United results. They still flash up on my phone from the BBC app because I want to see how they're doing, alongside the Dundee scores, which we won't talk about too much. Yeah, I think the other thing with some of the US investment that's come in, I think some of them haven't really appreciated the impact of promotion and relegation on their investment. I think that's a really interesting area. I'm watching with interest that we're Tottenham Hotspur to get relegated this season. That could be catastrophic for the club, because I know that a number of their sponsorship deals have relegation clauses in them. I know that a couple of sponsors have already walked for the end of the season because they're not happy. And I'm speculating, but I wouldn't be surprised if they don't have relegation clauses in the players' contracts because they never thought they'd be in that position. So you could be looking at almighty shambles there if they were to go down. And I think there's been some investment in clubs elsewhere where they've not taken into account the impact of relegation and the difficulty of coming straight back up to avoid the sort of long-term impact. The parachute payments help, but they diminish year on year for the 3 years that you have them, and then you're in trouble.
Yeah, I suppose it goes back to what we were saying about trying to plan and operate, where we use Brentford as the example, that you can still survive and you can still be in the top tier without actually winning anything.
Yep.
Whereas I guess some of these clubs with the bigger budgets, it becomes very sensitive that if you don't achieve or do get relegated.
The difference is for the top teams, it's not even just about, it's not about relegation so much as if we're not in the Champions League and we forecast this year that we will be.
Yeah.
That's however many 30, 40 million off the top line straight off the bat. So that then impacts the money they have to spend on players and through PSR, etc. So yeah, every club has its sensitivities. Whether you're first to fourth or fifth to 10th or fighting relegation, the impact is substantial for each club in that situation. Just relegation is potentially a lot more terminal if you can't get straight back up. And you look at clubs, the likes of Fulham, Bournemouth, Fulham yo-yo for quite a while, now seem to have stabilised in the Premier League, but they don't have grounds that are huge. If they're entirely reliant on gate receipts and obviously sponsorship revenue dropping, that's a real challenge for them outside the parachute payments. Yeah. So yeah, I think the challenge is always going to be cash across sport. Again, you look at some of the counties in English cricket. I live not too far away from Leicestershire. They get 3,000 tops for games. You think, how on earth is that sustainable? You've got your central money, obviously. It's tough.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, because I was just about to mention cricket, because you're mentioning American investments in football specifically, and maybe not understanding the promotion relegation, because obviously all major sports in America is franchise model, which there may be opportunities here. The one thing, the way we're trying that is the 100 in cricket. I have to say, I'm not totally convinced by the 100 in terms of its longevity. And I think the impact it may have on some of the counties. Yes, they've had big payments after the auction of the franchise and so on. But I think many counties, particularly those who are non-hosts, have had to use that to pay down their debt. And then the money's gone, you pay down your debt, then what?
And I know of a number of counties that have had to do that. Smaller counties who don't have England matches there have had to go down that route. I think also cricket just doesn't know really where they want to be. Obviously, grew up watching Test match cricket and proper one days, 50 over games where the Benson Hedges final at Lords or whatever I used to go to from time to time. Then it was T20. Then it was the 100. I think you've had the T10 in Pakistan as well, the 10 over games.
Yeah.
And again, from a consumer fan point of view, that's quite confusing. If you're constantly changing it, I don't like all the graphics on the 100. I'm just old school. I like my Test match cricket. But
me too.
But it's opened up an opportunity for outward investment to come into cricket. I think the valuations that they were looking at they're unfounded first and foremost, and they're pretty ridiculous. In Indian cricket, the IPL absolutely is the main sport. The population's enormous. You've got that opportunity. English cricket outside of Test matches and probably T20. I don't see a huge amount of money there. Although saying that, the likes of the Oval, county cricket, they've created a venue again. It's 365. They've got I don't know what it's called now. It's the OCS standard who sponsors it now. But they've got that rooftop piece for events corporate events through the summer. They can host big award ceremonies in downstairs in the big function room. So they're set up, big conferences and the likes. But again, you come back to the smaller counties that don't have that luxury. Right? They're going to be constantly getting bailed out.
Yeah.
That becomes a point that has to stop. It's good.
Yeah, it does. It does. But again, it goes back to what we talked about a number of times, the emotion. You have generations of people who've been attached to the club, who've been members. I've been a member at Lancashire. Well, I was a member at Lancashire when I was about 8 years old, and followed the club ever since. And they're in a bit more of a fortunate position. But then they, like all these larger organisations, the amounts involved become more, the sensitivities around that become more, and it all is a bit precarious.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what the future holds for cricket. Maybe that's a discussion for another day.
I think it's interesting with Premiership Rugby because they're going down the route of franchise, making it a closed league, and then looking to add, for lack of a better term, franchises. I imagine that would be like some Worcester Warriors if they're back up and running. They could come up to us more. You keep the traditional names in clubs rather than suddenly creating West Country Wizards or whatever. So I don't think that would work. But I think that's an interesting bit because it means that it doesn't matter whether you're first or 10th. You can build knowing that you're not going to lose. So again, the American model, you're not getting relegated. You're going to have times where you're going to have fallow periods of success on the pitch, but that shouldn't actually impact the commercial arm of the business as much as it could. If you've been Newcastle Falcons for the last however many years, if Ealing Trailfinders had a stadium big enough, they were in trouble. But because they didn't, and to Coventry and so on didn't quite get there as well. They've been saying now, obviously Red Bull have invested into them. There'll be a different beast going forward.
Yes. Yeah, no, I'm sure.
I think that's the way to do it. Let the Championship become a sustainable league in itself, and then those that feel that they can make the step up can be added to the Premiership, but in a sustainable and gradual way, rather than all or nothing. We saw Jersey the year pushing huge investment goes, and the club virtually falls. That's the all or nothing just doesn't work. Whereas if you've got the likes of a Coventry, Nottingham, these are some really historic English clubs that maybe can now think we're in no rush. We'll be Championship. We'll make it work. We'll grow bit by bit, and then if we think we're ready, then we can have a look at it.
Yes, no, I think that's absolutely it. The Jersey story is it's a good case study in how important that support is when you're not actually generating enough money to pay your own way.
Yep. Yeah. No, exactly.
Oh, that's really interesting, David. You've got such a wide breadth of experience, and I really appreciate you sharing it with us. If there's one thing that you would give as advice to anybody who finds themselves in financial difficulties in sport, what would it be?
So I think if you're going in to deal with a turnaround, for example, rather than actually there's two things really. One is if you are in financial distress, call for help sooner than later. We all know that if you've got problems, whether it's banking covenants, whatever it might be, creditors, communication and being proactive are vital to have a chance of survival and turnaround. Leaving it to the last minute puts people offside because they're blindsided up until it's almost too late. But I think the theme of a lot of my career is don't forget about the people in the business and make sure that they're on board with what you're trying to achieve, that they feel part of what's going to be a turnaround, hopefully, so that everybody buys in, everybody works hard, and they see the fruits of their labour further down. I think it's very easy to get into the nuts and bolts of the finances, which you clearly have to do. To understand where it is, you have to cut costs. If you take the people on the journey and they understand why you're doing that in terms of cost cutting from day one, and if you go into business and you don't know exactly how all the pieces are linked together, but you can, by talking to the staff, understand the impact of a decision here. So the interdependencies of work streams is probably the best way to describe it, isn't it? It's just understanding that, but you need the people on board to do that so that they understand, and you don't want the resentment. You don't want people behind the scenes being destructive with just what they're saying to people. You want to make sure that externally the communication is the same. So no matter who's asked the question, it's a consistent message, internally and externally. So I think, don't forget the people is my takeaway, because I think too often that can happen.
Absolutely. That's great advice, David. Appreciate that. And I'm sure our listeners and viewers will as well. That was a fascinating conversation. And the themes we kept coming back to, the emotion that drives bad financial decisions, the importance of taking people with you, and the idea that getting a business right is not just about systems and structures, but it's about the standards you set yourselves and for the organisation. Those lessons apply everywhere. Kingsgate has been working with sporting organisations for years, and if I'm honest, there is something particularly satisfying about it. So whether that's in sport or in any other business facing pressure, come and talk to us at kingsgate.uk.com. And if you found this useful, please do subscribe and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts. It genuinely helps other people find the show. See you next time on The Value Agenda.